"There's poison in your drink," Sierra whispered, her voice barely cutting through the clatter of silverware against china. The dining room fell silent. Crystal glasses caught the lamplight like frozen tears. Jedediah Whitmore's hand stopped halfway. To his lips, the wine trembling in his glass. Sierra's heart hammered against her ribs. The bitter almond scent she'd caught while serving dinner now seemed to fill the entire room. Her fingers gripped the empty serving tray until her knuckles went white. Cornelius Whitmore shot to his feet, his chair scraping against hardwood. His face flushed red above his starched collar. "How dare you make such accusations?" "Victoria." Ashford's fork clattered to her plate. Her pale eastern complexion went ghost white. The help has lost her mind. Yet's gray eyes moved between the wineglass and Sierra's face. Something in her expression made him set the glass down hard. Wine sloshed over the rim, staining the white tablecloth like blood. "Explain," he said quietly. Sierra's mouth went dry. Every word could be her last. "I saw Mr. Cornelius in the storage room earlier. He was handling the rat poison. The smell. It's the same." Cornelius slammed his palm against the table. "She's lying. Probably planted it herself to frame me." Victoria stood, her silk dress rustling. "This is what happens when you trust people who don't know their place." Jed lifted the glass to his nose. His jaw tightened. The bitter almond scent was unmistakable now, sharp and chemical beneath the wine's sweetness. "Send for Sheriff Morrison," Cornelius demanded. "Have her arrested immediately." "For what?" Yet's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Attempted murder, conspiracy. She could have poisoned that wine herself." Sierra's legs trembled beneath her simple brown dress. She'd known this moment would come eventually. The moment when trying to do right would destroy everything she'd worked to build. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked like a countdown. Outside, wind rattled the windows of the ranch house. The sound felt like bones shaking. "Why would she warn me if she'd poisoned it herself?" Jed asked. Cornelius's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. "To throw off suspicion. Make herself look innocent." Victoria moved closer to Jed, her hand reaching for his arm. "Darling, you can't seriously be considering the word of a maid over your own family." Jed pulled away from her touch. His gaze never left Sierra's face. "You're certain about what you saw?" It wasn't a question. Sierra nodded once, sharp and definite. "Then we wait for the sheriff." The next hour crawled by like winter. Sierra sat in the kitchen under the watchful eye of Mrs. Henderson, the cook. The older woman's face showed nothing, but her hands moved nervously as she cleaned already spotless counters. Sheriff Morrison arrived with the smell of horses and tobacco clinging to his coat. His boots left mud prints across the polished floors. He was Cornelius's friend, everyone knew that. "Miss Baptiste," he said, tipping his hat with mock politeness. "Seems you've caused quite a stir." Sierra stood straight, meeting his gaze. "I told the truth. Truth's a funny thing. Depends on who's telling it." Cornelius appeared in the doorway, his composure restored. "Sheriff, I want her arrested immediately. She's clearly unstable." Morrison nodded, reaching for his handcuffs. "Reckon that's best for everyone." "Wait." Yet's voice cut through the kitchen like a blade. He stood in the doorway, still holding the wine glass. "I had Doc Miller test this. Arsenic. Enough to kill." "A horse." The kitchen went dead quiet. Morrison's hand froze on his belt. "That doesn't prove she didn't put it there," Cornelius said quickly. "No," Jed agreed, "but it proves someone did." Sierra watched the three men face each other across the small kitchen. Tension thick as smoke filled the air. She understood the game being played now. Politics and power. Family loyalty against outside truth. Morrison cleared his throat. "Well now, this complicates things." "Not really," Cornelius said. "She had access to the wine. She had opportunity. She also saved my life," Jed pointed out. "After trying to take it." The argument continued, but Sira stopped listening. She was already planning her escape. Before dawn, she'd be gone. Back to running, back to hiding. The brief safety she'd found at the Whitmore Ranch was over. She slipped out through the kitchen door while the men argued. The night air bit through her thin shawl. Stars scattered across the sky like scattered salt. Her small room above the stables held everything she owned. 2 dresses, a pair of worn boots, the papers declaring her a free woman. Forged papers, but good enough to fool most people. She was folding her spare dress when boots sounded on the wooden steps outside. Heavy boots, male boots. The door opened without a knock. Jed Whitmore stood silhouetted against the lamplight from below. His hat cast shadows across his weathered face. Planning to run, he said. Seems wise. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The tiny room felt even smaller with his presence filling it. I have a different idea. Sarah's hand stilled on her packing. I'm listening. Marry me. The words hit her like cold water. She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. Tomorrow morning, he continued. Before the sheriff decides whose story he believes. You've lost your mind. Maybe, but it's the only way to keep you alive. He moved closer, his voice dropping. A wife can't be forced to testify against her husband. Marriage gives you legal protection. And what do you get out of it? His gray eyes met hers directly. Someone I can trust. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me the truth, even when it's dangerous. Sira sank onto her narrow bed. The proposal was insane. Marriage between a white rancher and a black woman would cause a scandal that would echo across the territory. They'll destroy you for it, she said quietly. They're already trying to destroy me. At least this way, I'll have an ally. Outside, an owl called across the darkness. The sound felt like a warning. Why should I trust you? Because I'm the only one who listened when you spoke tonight. Sira looked at her hands, calloused from years of hard work. A marriage of convenience to a white man. It would make her a target in ways she'd never been before. But staying unmarried would likely get her hanged. One condition, she said finally. Name it. When this is over, when we find out who really tried to poison you, we end this arrangement. Clean and simple, Jed nodded once. Deal. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Sira? Yes. Thank you. For the warning tonight. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the weight of tomorrow's impossible choice. Dawn broke gray and unforgiving over the Whitmore Ranch. Sira stood before the cracked mirror in her small room, braiding her hair with steady hands. Her wedding day. The thought tasted bitter as burnt coffee. The ceremony took place in Judge Hartwell's cramped office in town. No flowers. No music. Just legal words spoken over a worn Bible while dust motes danced in the morning light. Victoria Ashford arrived uninvited, her silk dress inappropriate for the sparse surroundings. Her face held the pale shock of someone watching the house burn down. Jed, you can't do this, she whispered as the judge opened his book. Yet's jaw tightened. His Sunday suit hung loose on his frame, evidence of recent weight loss. It's done, Victoria. Your father would roll over in his grave. My father's been dead 10 years. His opinion doesn't matter anymore. The judge cleared his throat. His words fell like stones into still water. Do you, Jedediah Whitmore, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Seraphina Baptist, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Sira's voice came out steady. I do. The ring was simple gold, worn smooth by time. It had belonged to Yet's mother. The metal felt heavy against Sira's finger, weighted with expectations she didn't understand. Victoria fled before the judge finished speaking. Her sobs echoed down the courthouse steps like a funeral dirge. Word spread through the territory faster than wildfire. By noon, riders carried the news to every ranch, every settlement, every trading post within 50 miles. The white cattle baron had married his black maid. The reaction came swift and merciless. Harrison Ashford, Victoria's father, arrived at the ranch that afternoon. His face carried the cold fury of a man whose careful plans had crumbled to dust. "You've lost your mind, Jedediah." Jed sat on his porch, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. "My mind seems clear enough. This marriage makes you unmarketable, untouchable. No decent business will associate with you. Then I'll find indecent ones." Ashford's hands clenched into fists. "Our cattle contract is void. The bank loan I guaranteed is withdrawn. You'll be bankrupt within 6 months. Is that a threat or a promise? It's a fact." Ashford climbed back into his carriage without another word. The wheels kicked up dust clouds that settled like ash over everything. Inside the house, Sierra moved through the main rooms with careful steps. Every surface held memories that didn't belong to her. Family portraits stared down with dead eyes. Crystal glasses caught afternoon light like trapped tears. Mrs. Henderson, the cook, watched her with wary respect. The older woman had worked for the Whitmores for 20 years. She understood the delicate balance of power in a house where everything had just shifted. "Master Jed likes his coffee black," she said quietly. "He's not my master," Sierra replied. "No, but he's your husband now. That's something different." The ranch hands gathered in the bunkhouse that evening, their voices carrying across the yard like distant thunder. Some spoke of loyalty to Jed. Others whispered about unnatural unions and bad luck. Tom Bradford, the head wrangler, knocked on the kitchen door near midnight. His hat twisted in his weathered hands. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, the title sounding strange on his tongue. "Half the boys are talking about riding out come morning." Sierra set down her cup of tea. "Because of me. Because of fear. Fear of what folks will say. Fear of what this means. And you?" Tom's eyes met hers directly. "I've worked this ranch for 15 years. Jed Whitmore is a fair man. Fair men are scarce in this territory. But fair doesn't always win. Sometimes it just gets you killed." He left without another word, his boots echoing across the empty yard. Sierra found Jed in his study, surrounded by ledgers and papers. Numbers covered every surface like battlefield maps. The lamplight carved deep shadows under his eyes. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough." He didn't look up from his calculations. "Ashford's withdrawal leaves us exposed. The bank will call in the loan within 30 days. Can you pay it? Not with cattle dying and contracts being canceled." Sierra moved closer, studying the papers over his shoulder. The numbers told a story of slow strangulation. Expenses rising, while income dropped like stones into a well. "These cattle deaths," she said. "When did they start?" 3 months ago. Just after Cornelius took over managing the books. "And the symptoms?" Jed finally looked up, his gray eyes sharp with sudden attention. "Weakness, trembling, some kind of wasting disease. What if it's not disease?" The question hung between them like smoke. Outside, wind rattled the windows with increasing urgency. "Storm weather coming." "You think someone's been poisoning the cattle?" "I think someone's been poisoning everything around here." Jed leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. His hands rubbed his temples where exhaustion had carved permanent lines. "If you're right, then Cornelius has been planning this for months." "Planning what?" "To take everything." Thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the house to its foundations. Rain began pelting the windows with sharp, angry drops. Sierra studied the ledgers more carefully, her finger tracing columns of numbers. Something didn't add up. Cattle reported dead, but no corresponding decrease in feed costs. Sale prices that seemed too low for healthy livestock. "These sales to Morrison Ranch," she said. 40 head at $12 each. Disease cattle. Had to sell them cheap. "But Morrison." "Ranch is owned by Sheriff Morrison's brother." Yet's hands stilled on the papers. Are you certain? I heard the ranch hands talking. They thought it was strange, selling sick cattle to anyone, unless they weren't sick. The pieces began falling into place like dominoes. Healthy cattle, sold cheap to friendly buyers. Sick cattle left to die where everyone could see them. Books that showed losses while money disappeared into hidden accounts. He's been stealing from you, Sierra said quietly. More than stealing. He's been destroying the ranch systematically. Lightning illuminated the study in stark white flashes. In that brief moment, Sierra saw something in Yet's face she hadn't noticed before. Not just anger, but recognition. The look of a man who'd been blind but could suddenly see. What do? We prove it. How? By being smarter than he thinks we are. Jed stood and moved to the window, watching rain turn the yard into a muddy lake. His reflection ghosted across the glass, transparent and shifting. This marriage, he said without turning around, it protects you legally, but it also makes you a target. I know. People will say things, do things, try to drive us apart. I know that too. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. Why did you really warn me about the poison? The question caught her off guard. She'd expected practical talk, not personal inquiry, because it was right. Even knowing what it would cost you, especially knowing what it would cost me. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, but understanding. The recognition of one survivor, acknowledging another. We'll make this work, he said quietly. The marriage or the ranch, both. Outside, the storm reached its peak, rain hammering the roof like bullets. But inside the study, surrounded by numbers and ledgers and the weight of impossible odds, something else was beginning. Not love, not yet, but partnership. The kind forged in shared danger and mutual respect. Sierra picked up one of the ledgers, studying the careful handwriting that recorded their destruction. Tomorrow we start gathering proof. Tomorrow we start fighting back. Thunder rolled across the sky again, but this time it sounded less like a warning and more like a war drum. The real battle was just beginning. The investigation began at dawn. Sierra moved through the ranch with the invisibility that came from years of being overlooked. Servants saw everything. People forgot that truth at their peril. She found Cornelius in the barn, talking quietly with two men she didn't recognize. Their clothes marked them as townspeople, not ranch hands. Their voices carried the careful cadence of business deals made in shadows. The Territorial Commission meets next week, one man said. Once the disease is officially documented, we can begin seizure proceedings. Cornelius nodded, his hand steady as he counted out gold coins. How many more cattle need to die? 50 should be sufficient. Make sure they're visible from the main road. Sierra pressed herself against the barn wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. The morning sun cast long shadows that helped conceal her presence. A barn cat rubbed against her legs, purring softly. What about the brother? The second man asked. Jed won't be a problem much longer. His new wife has made him a pariah. No one will listen to him. And if they do? Cornelius's smile held no warmth. Then we'll make sure they stop. The men left through the back of the barn, their horses' hooves muffled by the soft earth. Sierra waited until the sound faded completely before moving. The water trough behind the barn told its own story. A thin film of something oily floated. On the surface, the smell was wrong, chemical and bitter. Sierra pulled out a small glass vial she'd taken from the kitchen and filled it carefully. Evidence, finally. Something concrete. She found Jed examining the eastern pasture, where another group of cattle lay dead. Their bodies were positioned where anyone riding the main road would see them clearly. The arrangement felt deliberate, theatrical. Someone's been moving them. Jed said without looking up. How can you tell? Cattle don't die in straight lines. Sierra handed him the vial of water. They're poisoning the water supply. Jed held the glass up to the light. The oily film swirled in patterns that caught the sun like miniature rainbows. What kind of poison? Something that makes them sick. Slowly, weak, so it looks like disease instead of murder. And then? Then the Territorial Commission declares the land diseased, seizes it for public safety. The pieces fell together with terrible clarity. Not just murder, but systematic. Theft disguised as public health measures. Cornelius wasn't just trying to inherit the ranch. He was trying to steal it legally. They rode to the Morrison Ranch that afternoon, following a trail of dust and circumstantial evidence. The spread was smaller than theirs, but the cattle looked healthy, too healthy for a ranch that supposedly bought diseased animals. Sheriff Morrison's brother, Frank, met them at the gate. His weathered face showed no surprise at their arrival. "Jed, heard you got yourself married. Heard you bought some cattle from us." Frank's eyes flicked to Sierra, then back to Jed. Bought. What Cornelius was selling. Didn't ask too many questions. What condition were they in? Healthy as horses. Strange thing, considering what I heard about disease on your spread. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Frank Morrison had just confirmed what they suspected. Healthy cattle sold cheap, while sick ones were left to create the appearance of widespread disease. "You willing to testify to that?" Jed asked. Frank's expression grew cautious. "Testify to what?" "That the cattle you bought were healthy." "Don't know that I want to. Get involved in family disputes. This isn't about family, it's about theft." Frank adjusted his hat, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Theft's a serious accusation. So is fraud." The two men stared at each other while dust devils danced across the dry ground. Finally, Frank nodded once, sharp and definitive. "You bring me papers, legal papers. I'll tell what I know." They rode home in silence, the weight of revelation heavy between them. The sun burned overhead, turning the sky white at the edges. Heat shimmers made the distant mountains dance. That evening, Sierra discovered Yet's study had been searched. Papers scattered across the floor. Desk drawers pulled open and emptied. The safe stood open, its contents gone. "They took everything," Jed said from the doorway. "Financial records, cattle receipts, purchase orders, bank statements. Everything that could prove the fraud." Sierra knelt and began gathering the scattered papers. Most were worthless now, but habits died hard. Order from chaos, even when the chaos was deliberate. "They're moving faster than we expected," she said. "Or we're closer to the truth than they're comfortable with." A knock at the front door interrupted them. Tom Bradford stood on the porch, his hat in his hands and worry carved into his weathered features. "Boss, we got problems." "What kind of problems?" "The kind that ride in groups and carry torches." Through the parlor window, they could see lights moving across the darkness. Riders, at least a dozen, approaching from the east. The flames flickered against the night sky, casting dancing shadows across the ground. "What do they want?" Sierra asked. Tom's eyes found hers in the lamplight. "They want you gone. Both of you." The riders stopped just outside the main gate. Their leader, a man Sierra didn't recognize, urged his horse forward a few steps. "Jedediah Whitmore," he called out. "We want to talk." Jed stepped onto the porch, his rifle held casually but ready. "Then talk. This marriage is an abomination. It's bringing shame on the whole territory. My marriage is my business. Not when it affects the rest of us. Not when it brings bad luck and disease." Sierra joined Jed on the porch, her presence causing murmurs among the riders. Some of their horses shifted nervously, sensing the tension. "The only disease here is greed," Jed said quietly. "You're bewitched, man. Can't you see what she's done to you? I see plenty. I see men who ride in darkness because they're afraid of the light." The leader's hand moved toward his gun. The gesture was slight, almost casual, but Jed caught it. His rifle came up smooth and steady. "I wouldn't," Jed said. The night went still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Sira could hear her own heartbeat, loud as thunder in her ears. "This isn't over," the leader said finally. "No, it's not." The riders wheeled their horses and disappeared into the darkness, their torches fading to pinpricks against the vast sky. But their message was clear. The territory had chosen sides, and most of those sides were against them. Inside, Jed poured himself a whiskey with hands that barely trembled. Sira noticed the tremor anyway. Even strong men had limits. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Until what?" "Until they stop talking and start shooting." Jed drank his whiskey in one swallow. "Not long." "Then we need to move faster." "Agreed. But first, we need to know exactly what we're up against." Sira moved to the window, watching the darkness where the riders had disappeared. Somewhere out there, Cornelius was orchestrating their destruction with methodical precision. The poisoned cattle were just the beginning. "There's something else," she said. "Something I overheard in the barn." "What?" "They mentioned a territorial commission meeting next week. Once the disease is officially documented, they start seizure proceedings." Jed set down his empty glass with careful precision. "How many people are involved in this?" "More than we thought. Territorial officials, local businessmen, maybe even federal representatives. It's not just about the ranch. No, it's about the land itself, what's underneath it." They stood in the lamplight, surrounded by the remnants of their search study, understanding finally dawning. The Whitmore Ranch sat on valuable land. Mineral rights, water rights, transportation routes. Worth far more than cattle. "We're not just fighting Cornelius," Jed said. "No, we're fighting an entire system." Outside, an owl called across the darkness. The sound felt lonely, mournful, but also defiant. Some creatures refused to be silenced, no matter how dark the night became. Sira touched the glass vial in her pocket, their only concrete evidence. Tomorrow they would need more than water samples and witness testimony. They would need a miracle, or they would need to become the miracle themselves. Cornelius struck back with the precision of a snake. 3 professional gunmen arrived in town on the morning stage, their clothes dust-covered, but their weapons clean. Word traveled fast in small territories. These men hadn't come for cattle work. The first fire started in the north pasture just after midnight. Orange flames licked at the dry grass while Sira and Jed fought to contain the spread. By dawn, 50 acres lay blackened and smoking. "Accident," Sheriff Morrison declared when he arrived to investigate. His eyes held no conviction behind the words. The second fire took the hay barn 2 nights later. Mrs. Henderson woke Sira with urgent shaking, her gray hair loose around her frightened face. "The barn's burning," she whispered. They stood in the yard watching their winter feed turn to ash and ember. The flames painted everything crimson, casting dancing shadows across their faces. "This is just the beginning," Jed said quietly. He was right. The bank sent a formal notice the next morning. Loan payment due in full within 15 days. No extensions, no negotiations. Harrison Ashford's signature appeared at the bottom of the letter, neat and final as a gravestone inscription. Victoria arrived that afternoon in her father's carriage, her face pale but determined. She wore traveling clothes and carried a small leather satchel. "I need to speak with you," she told Sira, alone. They sat in the front parlor while afternoon light filtered through lace curtains. Victoria's hands trembled as she opened her satchel. "I've been investigating your background," she said. "I know, but what I found." Victoria's voice caught. "It's not what I expected." She pulled out a stack of papers. Legal documents, wanted posters, newspaper clippings. Sira's life spread across the coffee table in black and white. Serafina Dubois, Victoria read. Escaped slave. $500 reward. Sarah's chest tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. Is there a question in there? You're not just any escaped slave. You're the daughter of Marcus Dubois, the New Orleans architect. These newspaper articles about your escape. They tell a different story than I expected. Victoria spread out the clippings with careful hands. Headlines spoke of a forced marriage, a brutal plantation owner, a daring escape that captured the public imagination. You were being sold into marriage against your will. Marriage is a generous term for what Pierre Boudreau had planned. Victoria's face went white. The articles don't say that. Articles rarely say what matters. They sat in silence while dust motes danced in the afternoon light. Outside, hammering sounds echoed as the ranch hands repaired fire damage. Why are you showing me this? Sarah asked. Victoria's hands clenched in her lap. Because I thought I was protecting Jed from you, but I was wrong. About what? About who the real threat is. Victoria pulled out another set of papers. These were newer, crisper. Financial documents with her father's letterhead. My father is part of it, she said quietly. The land grab. The conspiracy. Everything. The admission hung between them. Like smoke. Sarah studied the papers, seeing Harrison Ashford's name alongside territorial officials and mining company representatives. How long have you known? I suspected after the wedding, but I didn't want to believe it. Victoria's voice broke slightly. I found these in his study last night. The documents outlined a systematic plan. Ranch after ranch, targeted for acquisition. Through manufactured crises, disease, drought, debt. Whatever worked to force sales at rock-bottom prices. The Whitmore Ranch isn't the first, Sarah realized. Or the last. Footsteps on the porch announced Yet's return. He entered the parlor with mud on his boots and exhaustion carved into his features. His eyes took in the scene, the papers, Victoria's tear-stained face. What's this about? Victoria stood, her composure cracking completely. I'm sorry, Jed. I'm so sorry. She fled the room, leaving her evidence scattered across the coffee table. Jed picked up the papers, his expression growing darker with each page. Your father-in-law tried to have you killed, Sarah said. Former father-in-law. The distinction might not matter to him. Jed set down the papers with careful precision. How many people are involved in this? More than we can fight. But fewer than we thought. Sarah looked at him questioningly. These documents show the structure, the chain of command. We're not fighting the entire territory. We're fighting a specific group of men with specific interests. That doesn't make them less dangerous. No, but it makes them more predictable. A knock at the door interrupted them. Tom Bradford entered without waiting for permission, his weathered face grim. Boss, we got riders coming. A lot of them. Through the window, they could see dust clouds rising from the east. More riders than before, moving with military precision. How many? Jed asked. 30, maybe 40. This wasn't another intimidation visit. This was an attack. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. The game had changed. Words and warnings had given way to direct action. Get the women to the root cellar, Jed ordered. Arm the men. Who'll stand with us? How many is that? 8, maybe 10. 8 men against 40. The mathematics of survival looked grim. Sarah moved through the house, gathering supplies with mechanical efficiency. Water, ammunition, medical supplies. The preparations of someone who'd learned to expect the worst. In the kitchen, Mrs. Henderson packed food with shaking hands. Where will you go after? The older woman asked. After what? After they burn us out. Sarah paused in her packing. The question assumed defeat, assumed loss. But it also assumed survival. I don't know. You could go north. Canada doesn't have the same laws. And leave Jed? Mrs. Henderson's eyes met hers across the kitchen table. He'd want you to live. He'd want us both to live. The sound of approaching hooves grew louder. Sierra moved to the window, counting riders and weapons. Professional gunmen mixed with local ranchers. Fear and greed riding together toward their door. Jed appeared in the kitchen doorway, his rifle in hand and resolve carved into his features. "They're here." Sierra nodded, checking the pistol tucked into her belt. The weight felt familiar, comforting. Some skills never left you, no matter how much you hoped they would. "Mrs. Henderson, get to the cellar." "What about you?" "We're staying." "Child, you can't fight 40 men." "We're not fighting 40 men. We're fighting the idea that 40 men can take whatever they want." The distinction felt important, even if the bullets wouldn't care about philosophy. Outside, the riders formed a semicircle around the house. Their leader, a man with silver hair and hard eyes, urged his horse forward. "Jedediah Whitmore," he called. "This is your last chance to end this peacefully." Jed stepped onto the porch, his rifle held ready, but not quite aimed. "And what?" "This unnatural union. This corruption of decent society. My marriage is legal and valid. Legal don't make it right." The philosophical debate felt surreal, with 40 armed men providing punctuation. But words still mattered, even here, even now. "Right is protecting innocent people," Jed said. "Right is telling the truth even when it's dangerous. Truth is what decent folks say it is. Then decent folks are wrong." The silver-haired man's hand moved toward his gun. But before he could draw, another voice cut through the tension. "Stand down." Victoria Ashford rode through the circle of gunmen, her horse lathered with sweat and her face determined. Behind her rode a dozen men in territorial uniforms. "This gathering is illegal," she announced. "Disperse immediately." The silver-haired man's face showed confusion and anger. "Miss Ashford, what are you doing here?" "Preventing a massacre." She held up an official-looking document, territorial warrant. "These men are under federal protection pending investigation of land fraud." The words hit the assembled riders with the force of a physical blow. Federal protection meant federal attention. Federal attention meant questions they couldn't answer. One by one, the riders began backing away. Not all of them, but enough. The mathematics of violence had shifted in favor of survival. But Sierra could see the calculation in the remaining men's eyes. This wasn't over. It was just postponed. The real battle was still coming. Victoria's protection bought them 3 days. On the 4th morning, federal marshals arrived at dawn, their badges gleaming like promises of justice. But their leader, Marshal Hendricks, carried papers that turned hope to ash. "Serafina Dubois," he said, reading from an official warrant. "You're under arrest for theft of property and violation of the Fugitive Slave Act." Sierra's hands remained steady as she poured coffee. The cup didn't rattle against the saucer. Years of survival had taught her to control the trembling. "Property theft?" Jed asked. "Herself," Hendricks replied. "According to Louisiana law, she belongs to the Boudreaux estate. She's a free woman, married to me. Marriage to stolen property doesn't legitimize the theft." Victoria stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Marshal, I have evidence of fraud in this case." "What kind of evidence?" "Financial records showing the Boudreaux plantation was bankrupted 2 years ago. The estate has no legal standing." Hendricks studied the papers Victoria offered. His weathered face showed no emotion, but his eyes held the calculation of a man weighing competing authorities. "Federal law supersedes territorial disputes," he said finally. "Even when the federal complaint is fraudulent, that's for the courts to decide." Sierra set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "How long do I have?" "We leave within the hour." The words fell into the kitchen like stones into still water. Mrs. Henderson's face crumpled. Tom Bradford, standing in the doorway, removed his hat and stared at the floor. Yet's hand moved toward his gun. The gesture was subtle, almost unconscious. But Sierra caught it. Don't, she said quietly. I won't let them take you. You can't fight federal marshals. I can try. The pain in his voice cut deeper than any blade. Sierra realized with sudden clarity that their marriage of convenience had become something else entirely. When had that happened? When had survival become love? If you fight them, you'll be dead, she said. Dead men can't help anyone. Hendricks cleared his throat diplomatically. Ma'am, if you come peacefully, there won't be any trouble for your husband. The threat was politely delivered, but unmistakable. Sierra's compliance would buy Yet's safety. Her resistance would doom them both. I need a moment to pack. You have 10 minutes. Sierra moved through the house, gathering the few possessions that mattered. The ring Jed had given her. A book of poetry she'd hidden under her mattress. The glass vial containing poisoned water, evidence of Cornelius's crimes. In the bedroom, she found Jed waiting. There's another way, he said. What way? We run. Together right now. The temptation was almost overwhelming. To disappear into the vast wilderness. To build a new life where nobody knew their names or their history. They'll follow us. Let them try. And when they catch us, then we'll have tried. Sierra looked around the bedroom at the life they'd built. In such a short time. Not a perfect life, but an honest one. Worth fighting for, worth protecting. If we run, Cornelius wins. The ranch is lost. The conspiracy succeeds. The ranch doesn't matter. It does to you. Yet's hands clenched into fists, not more than you do. The admission caught them both by surprise. They stood in the morning light, staring at each other across the wreckage of their careful plans. When did this become real? She asked. When you warned me about the poison. When you risked everything for someone you barely knew. And for you, when you stayed. When you fought beside me instead of running. Footsteps on the stairs announced time's end. Marshal Hendricks appeared in the doorway, his expression apologetic but firm. Ma'am, we need to go. Sierra nodded, shouldering her small bag. She paused at the bedroom door, looking back at Jed one last time. Find the truth, she said. Prove the conspiracy. Clear both our names. I will. Promise me. I promise. The journey to town passed in silence. Sierra rode between two marshals, her hands bound but her back straight. Behind them, a small group of supporters followed at a distance. Tom Bradford, Mrs. Henderson, even some of the ranch hands who'd stayed loyal. Victoria rode alongside the procession, her face set with determination. This isn't over, she told Sarah. What do you mean? I sent telegrams last night to newspapers in Denver, Santa Fe, San Francisco. By tomorrow, this story will be front-page news across the West. What story? The truth. About the land conspiracy. About federal marshals being used to silence witnesses. Hope flickered in Sierra's chest, fragile as a candle flame in wind. At the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Some faces showed hostility, others curiosity, but more than expected showed support. Word had spread about the conspiracy, about the systematic theft of ranch land. Inside the building, Judge Hartwell waited with obvious discomfort. The same man who'd married Sierra and Jed now faced the prospect of sending her back to slavery. This is a federal matter, Hendricks announced. We're taking the prisoner to Denver for trial. Not so fast, Victoria said, stepping forward with another set of papers. I have new evidence. What kind of evidence? Proof that Pierre Boudreau is dead. Has been dead for 18 months. The courtroom went silent. Marshal Hendricks took the papers, studying them with growing confusion. Death certificate, Victoria continued. Signed by a New Orleans doctor. Witnessed by 3 citizens. If Boudreau is dead, who filed the complaint? Judge Hartwell asked. Someone using his name fraudulently. The implications hung heavy in the air. If the complaint was fraudulent, then the arrest was illegal. If the arrest was illegal, then Sierra was free. Hendricks looked from the papers to Sierra to the crowd gathering outside. His weathered face showed a man caught between competing loyalties. "I'll need to verify this with New Orleans," he said finally. "How long will that take?" Jed asked. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. And in the meantime? In the meantime, Mrs. Whitmore remains in territorial custody. The compromise satisfied no one but offered hope. Sierra would be held in the local jail, not transported to Denver. Time to gather more evidence, to build a stronger case. As the marshals led her away, Sierra caught Yet's eye across the crowded courtroom. He nodded once, understanding passing between them without words. The real battle was just beginning. But for the first time since this started, they had all eyes. Victoria's courage, the community's growing support, the power of truth, slowly emerging from shadow. In her cell that night, Sierra listened to voices outside her window, people arguing, debating, choosing sides. The conspiracy that had operated in darkness was being dragged into daylight. She touched the wedding ring on her finger, feeling its weight. Whatever happened next, she was no longer alone. She had a husband who would fight for her, friends who would stand with her, a community slowly awakening to the truth. The morning would bring new challenges, new dangers. But it would also bring new possibilities. Justice was coming, slow as sunrise, but just as inevitable. The territorial courthouse filled beyond capacity on the morning of the final hearing. Every seat taken, people standing against walls, faces pressed to windows from outside. Word had spread across 3 territories about the case that would determine whether justice belonged to the powerful or the truthful. Judge Hartwell entered with obvious reluctance. His weathered hands shook slightly as he arranged papers on his bench. This decision would define his legacy. Sierra sat beside the territorial defender, a young lawyer named William Cross who'd volunteered his services. Across the aisle, Cornelius waited with Harrison Ashford and 2 expensive attorneys from Denver. Jed sat in the front row, his gray eyes never leaving Sierra's face. 2 weeks of investigation had carved new lines around his eyes, but his posture radiated quiet confidence. Victoria entered just as proceedings began, carrying a leather satchel that seemed to hold the weight of mountains. She'd spent 14 days in telegraph offices and courthouse archives, following paper trails across half the continent. "Your Honor," William Cross began, standing with documents in hand. "We have evidence of systematic fraud in multiple federal and territorial officials." The Denver attorneys objected immediately. "Hearsay and speculation." "Documentary evidence," Cross corrected, spreading papers across the defense table. "Financial records, forged death certificates, fraudulent land claims." Judge Hartwell leaned forward, his interest genuine for the first time in years. "Proceed," Victoria stepped forward, her testimony delivered with the precision of someone who'd memorized every detail. Pierre Boudreau died of yellow fever in New Orleans, March 15, 1874. The man who filed the federal complaint used a dead man's name to initiate illegal proceedings. "Who filed the complaint?" Judge Hartwell asked. "Cornelius Whitmore, using forged papers and a fictional law firm." The courtroom erupted. Cornelius shot to his feet, his face flushed with rage and panic. "That's impossible. I never filed any federal complaint." Victoria smiled with cold satisfaction. "The handwriting analysis says otherwise." She presented comparison samples. Cornelius's signature on ranch documents matched perfectly with the signature on federal forms filed under Boudreau's name. "Furthermore," Victoria continued, "we have evidence that Mr. Cornelius Whitmore has been systematically poisoning cattle and falsifying financial records to bankrupt his brother's ranch. The water samples Sierra had collected tested positive for arsenic. Frank Morrison's testimony confirmed healthy cattle sold below market value. Mrs. Henderson testified about Cornelius's access to poison and opportunity. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. Sheriff Morrison entered the courthouse carrying handcuffs and a confession letter. His face showed the exhaustion of a man who'd wrestled with his conscience and lost. "Your Honor, I have a signed confession from Cornelius Whitmore." The courtroom fell silent. Even the people pressed against windows stopped their murmuring. Mr. Whitmore confessed to conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, and theft of federal property. He's also named his co-conspirators. The list included Harrison Ashford, 3 territorial commissioners, a federal land office supervisor, and 2 Denver Mining Company executives. The conspiracy reached higher and spread wider than anyone had imagined. Cornelius sat frozen, his carefully constructed world crumbling like sandcastles in wind. His Denver attorneys gathered their papers and quietly left the courtroom. "The court finds all charges against Mrs. Serafina Whitmore to be fraudulent and without merit," Judge Hartwell declared. "She is hereby cleared of all accusations and confirmed as a free woman with full legal rights." The courthouse exploded with cheers and applause. Sierra felt tears streaming down her face, but her expression remained composed. Freedom was too precious to celebrate carelessly. Judge Hartwell wasn't finished. "Furthermore, this court validates the marriage between Jedediah and Serafina Whitmore as legal and binding under territorial law." More cheers, but Sierra only had eyes for Jed. He pushed through the crowd, reaching her just as the territorial defender removed her shackles. They embraced in the middle of the chaos, 2 people who'd found each other in the darkness and fought their way to the light together. "It's over," Jed whispered against her hair. "No," Sierra replied, looking at the crowd of supporters surrounding them. "It's beginning." The trials of the co-conspirators continued for months. Harrison Ashford lost his business empire and faced federal prison. The territorial commissioners were removed from office. The mining company executives fled to Mexico. But the real victory came 6 months later, when Sierra stood on the porch of their rebuilt ranch house, watching the sun set over land that truly belonged to them. The cattle were healthy now, grazing in pastures where clean water flowed. The ranch hands worked for fair wages and honest bosses. Neighbors who'd once shunned them now brought their families for Sunday dinners. Victoria had returned east, but her letters came regularly. She'd used her inheritance to fund a newspaper dedicated to exposing political corruption. Her first major story had been about their case. Mrs. Henderson still cooked their meals, but now she supervised a staff of 4. The ranch prospered under honest management, becoming a model for fair labor practices across the territory. In the evenings, Sierra worked on architectural plans for a school they were building, the first in the territory open to children of all backgrounds. Jed handled the legal and financial arrangements, their different skills creating something neither could achieve alone. Their marriage had been born of necessity, forged in crisis and tempered by shared struggle. But it had become something deeper. A partnership built on mutual respect, proven trust and love that grew stronger with each challenge overcome. Tom Bradford knocked on the door one evening, carrying news from town. More settlers coming through. Families looking for honest work and fair treatment. "Send them up," Jed replied. "We can always use good people." Sierra smiled, touching the ring on her finger. The gold was worn smooth now, but it had never felt heavier or more meaningful. Outside, stars appeared in the darkening sky. The same stars that had witnessed their desperate beginning now looked down on their hard-won peace. The wind carried the sound of cattle settling for the night, of horses moving through the pastures, of a community built on the radical idea that justice belonged to everyone. Sierra and Jed sat on their porch, planning tomorrow's work and next year's dreams. Their conversation was quiet, practical, touched with the easy intimacy of 2 people who'd seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay. In the distance, lantern light flickered in the bunkhouse windows, Families settled in their own small homes across the ranch. Children played in yards where their laughter mixed with the evening breeze. It wasn't the ending anyone had expected. When Sierra first whispered her warning about poison in a wine glass. But it was the ending they'd fought for, built together, and would defend as long as they drew breath. The territory was changing. Other ranchers adopted their practices. Other communities welcomed diversity. The conspiracy's exposure had created ripples that spread far beyond their small corner of the world. Justice had come slowly, like sunrise over mountains. But like sunrise, it had proved inevitable and transformative. Sierra touched her husband's hand as darkness settled over their land. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to do right in a world that often rewarded wrong. But tonight, they had each other, their home, and the quiet satisfaction of two people who'd kept their promises against impossible odds. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal and unchanging. But beneath them, in the small space two people had carved from chaos, everything had changed. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from, perhaps. We will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.